So, welcome to this panel. I'm really excited about what we're going to discuss today. But first, I just really want to remind ourselves of why we're here. So, we're all here about this mode shift, right? From the private car to public transport, micromobility, and walking. And I think we all agree that we have a challenge in kind of designing the right transport mix. But one of the underlying themes that we're going to discuss today is that land is a scarce resource in cities like Amsterdam or Paris or London or Bergen. Which means that regulators need to prioritize, regulate, and make really, really hard decisions. They need to ask, do we actually need all micromobility modes, as the voters were asked in Paris now? And if we find out that we actually do need all micromobility modes, how do we prioritize that land, knowing that our choices may make the offering less attractive for users? Also, how do we treat the fact that shared micromobility is a fairly new form of transport? Over 100 years have passed since the first cars came, parked where they wanted, and took so many lives that they made e-scooters seem like little baby angels floating on clouds, to put it that way. And we've had a bumpy launch of shared e-scooters, and now we regulate harder than the car even has. We put demands on operators and users that we wouldn't even dream of putting on automakers, bus operators, or car drivers, which begs the question, are we on the right track? Do all our regulations work towards the goals that we want them to, or do we need to adjust? Are we acting in accordance with the goals that we need to reach as cities and public transit authorities? My name is Lars Christian Grudem Olsen. I'm from Norway, and I used to be an operator of shared micromobility. Now I work as a micromobility consultant for public sector and basically act as a translator between operators and the public officials. So that's basically why I was asked to do this. So, without me saying anything more now, let's just give them a round of applause.
Yeah. I don't know.
Good. Good to see you here. What if we just start with a quick round of introductions? Or do you want to go and just say a bit about what you do, what your role is?
Yeah, so I'm managing the permit scheme for small electric vehicles in Bergen, which in practice means e-kick scooters. So managing policies, having contact with third parties like the police or citizens, having all with parking, so the digital management, and the physical infrastructure, so procuring parking bays or just painting areas. So all in contact with the operators and everything else.
Cool. Natalia.
Okay, hello. So my name is Natalia. I work for the city of Paris on developing shared mobility. So from car sharing to, well, regulating micromobility, Doppler especially.
Helen.
Thanks, and thanks everyone. I'm Helen Sharp. I'm the e-scooter trial lead for Transport for London. So TfL in London is the Strategic Transport Authority, and we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of why I say trial lead rather than anything else. But ultimately looking after e-scooters. Before that, I was head of business development for the bike share scheme that we also have in London. So yeah, about 10 years in micromobility now.
Thibault.
Hi everyone, so I'm Thibault. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Yanova. It's a transportation analytics startup based out of Paris and London. And we specialize in providing software solutions to cities around shared mobility management and regulation. We're currently active in 65 cities across Europe and the Middle East. Yeah, that's about me.
Cool. And I mean, all of you guys have challenging jobs from day to day, but I just really wanted to say a bit about the kind of city official role, because you guys have an amazingly challenging role in kind of trying to balance stakeholder needs. Bor, you told me recently that you try to please everyone and ironically end up pleasing no one. how can city officials best balance different stakeholder needs?
I think you need to have like guidelines, a set of rules which you stick to and which is clear for the operators. What are we actually doing? Well, the city comes first, but mobility is something you have to have in mind. So I also communicate that to the citizens, which call me up angry and just almost shouting at me, some of them, and I just have to, yeah, sorry, can't do that. So I think of it a bit like banks when they give house loans or something like that. They have like a rules which they have to stick to for 90 to 95% of the customers. And then 5% they can, be a bit more lenient. And I think of what I do as the same. 90 to 95% of the cases, you have your rules, parameters to stick to, and then you're a bit more flexible in a few.
Do you like citizen complaints?
No.
And Helen, the British trials are a bit, what can I say, exotic to us other Europeans. How do they work, and what's your role?
Yeah, so the UK setup, as you imply, is quite different to most of Europe. And that's based on the legal status of e-scooters. So at the moment, e-scooters actually are illegal to use on public roads unless they are part of a government-approved trial. There's about more than 30 trials that are running across the UK, and they've kind of been set up from the summer of 2020 as part of a government response to the COVID pandemic and the kind of aim to prevent a car-led recovery. London is one of those trial cities, and that's the trial that I lead on behalf of Transport for London. And really the main purpose of the trials is to try and collect data, as much data as possible, to try and learn as much as possible, and ultimately to provide that as an evidence base back to the government, to then be able to kind of pass the appropriate legislation. So it's really about kind of testing different standards, different processes, different ways of achieving certain outcomes, and really trying to get a sense of what do we know about e-scooters as a mode, and then crucially for London, like how does that then fit into the rest of our transport offering? So
you're kind of the administrator and collecting the data and then making recommendations to politicians and that they have to then vote on.
Yeah, so
is that
Transport for London is the contracting authority for the e-scooter rental services. So we set the requirements, and we then basically, myself and my team, then kind of manage the three operators that we've got in London to achieve those contracts, but also kind of to achieve the policy aims that we're trying to set out. And then some of that data goes back to the Department for Transport so that that can kind of form part of the overall recommendation alongside all the other cities. So there's kind of two parts. There's the what should an actual vehicle look like and what should the standards look like? And then what are the appropriate powers that a transport authority should have to be able to decide who operates, where do they operate, at what point do they operate, kind of what happens if there's a rule that's missed or overstepped and that sort of thing.
And we'll get back to London in a bit. I just really want to hear with Thibaut, because you're kind of helping city officials, your company is helping city officials regulate. And you're in touch with both city officials and operators. So how do operators view city officials, this rare breed of
Shall I give like
Not personal.
no personal comments here, just like a generalized view, please.
I think it really depends. I mean, I think what's happening is obviously like Norway 4 or 5 years down the road from when it started. So I think a lot of city officials or civil servants basically moved into the role of being a shared micromobility manager. which is a role basically that did not exist before. So I think people like the competency rised a lot as well. I mean, to be honest, like most of our clients, I believe, are very skilled today in terms of like understanding the scheme and got more and more like data driven. I think it really depends the city, but we had that conversation. I think the city that works the best are the ones that have the dissociation between let's say the politics and the administration. So the one that can actually like set a strategy over 4 years or more, and have the administration actually like apply and execute the strategy, and making sure that we have that continuation of strategy and execution. So yes, generally, like I find that most cities today are quite data native, and the people in charge like are well aware of the scheme.
Cool.
And then you have the two opposites. You have cities that are over-regulating, and that's what we see like in some countries like in the Middle East, where it's very painful for operators in terms of profitability, etc. And you have cities that are not regulating at all, and there is no level playing field. Parking-wise, it's also a mess for operators, and that's the opposite. And in both cases, they end up leaving the city. So it's about finding the right balance. Yeah.
Good. And Natalia, you are an administrator in Paris, and I think many in this room probably were a bit disappointed of kind of the whole e-scooter vote, shared e-scooter vote, how the whole thing happened. And I think the question that a lot of people are sitting with here is, why didn't Parisians choose to extend the e-scooter, shared e-scooter tender? And why did you put it to the vote?
Okay. So indeed, it was Parisians who said that they didn't want it any longer to have e-scooter offers in Paris. I mean, of course, our Lady Mayor said previously that if it was for her, she would not continue with them. However, she would follow the decision of Parisians. So what we can see today, with 5 years after the first e-scooter came to Paris, in fact, Paris, when operators came, they would promise that e-scooter trips would replace trips done by car. And Paris' strategy was indeed, since several years ago, to ban cars and to reduce trips done by car. So no studies were done yet. So the city did, even though there was no legal framework in Paris, in France, for e-scooters, the city found it was an innovative solution and gave a chance, I would say. So e-scooters were allowed from the very beginning, which was not the case in other cities in Europe. So meeting groups, working groups with operators were installed in order to better integrate these new solutions. And in fact, the city invested a lot, because the city invested almost 2 million euros creating the dreamed parking offer that has been mentioned all these years. Because operators would say, well, we need a good parking offer every 150 or 200 meters in order to not walk that much and have an e-scooter available everywhere in Paris. So there were 2,500 spots available to park 15,000 e-scooters. So the city did, I would say, everything that was available in order to better organize the space and to provide room enough and place enough to this new alternative solution. So after that, of course, studies were made, because we analyzed the model shift, we analyzed how trips are made, who do these trips, and what we saw afterwards. Today what we know is that indeed there's a difference when for e-scooter owners and e-scooter users that use shared e-scooters. The difference is quite, well, it's important because while someone who would buy an e-scooter would really replace their trip done by car, at least I'm talking just for the Parisian metropolitan area because I don't know what happens elsewhere. But with the studies what we did showed that there was a slight difference, important difference, and it was not the same when you buy an e-scooter that if you use the shared e-scooters. So trips were very short. Well, not that short, but maybe 2 or 3 kilometers, and mostly they would be used otherwise by walking or cycling or by metro. So today what we see is that if we have a dense area, maybe it's not what the city wills to promote.
And I really want to commend you for coming out here into the lion's den and really just kind of giving those answers, because I think when we hear your answers, we kind of see that we're all aligned on the same page in what we're trying to achieve. It's just a matter of like seeing like, okay, how is it best achieved in Paris?
But I think for the case of Paris, to be honest, I think it raised the question about again having the politicians and the administration on two sides, you know, and
Explain. Yeah.
What I would like to explain is making sure that we indeed rely on the right data and making sure that the data are correctly updated and making sure that we have a very transparent discussion. What I mean by that is that in the case of Paris, it was a complex political landscape. And I think some decisions are driven by this complex political landscape.
Well, I would just like to say that statistically, we can find arguments to say why do not continue with these quotas. So it's not just political, but you know, regarding the objectives that the city has, like according to climate objectives, according to health issues, if we have not that much space, why should we give so much space for mobility of a mode who finally does not fulfill that much the objective of the city? You know, this is just a statistic or, you know, it's not political.
I think I know a bit about what kind of each of your points are. So if I can kind of see if I can clarify here, because I think what Thibaut is getting at in terms of his perspective and competence from the Vianova software, it's kind of if the city of Paris and the operators could show kind of more parking compliance data, then that would kind of influence the decision. But I think what you're getting at, Natalia, is that you have a limited amount of city space in Paris because it's such a dense city. And then you need to choose which kind of mobility do we actually want here, like as a total. And just as a bridge to that, because I don't think all know here that Paris has one of the most successful docked bike share schemes in the world. Can you tell us just briefly about that and why active mobility is so important to Paris?
Well, indeed, Paris launched the LEAP system shared bicycle in 2007, and today, in fact, it's not longer from the city, but it's handled by the metropolitan area. Today, it's the LEAP Métropole, and there are more than 60 municipalities that take part in this program, and that would subsidize bike sharing. So you find there are like 20,000 bikes available, docked bikes. Inside Paris, you have like 1,500 stations with more than 30 spots, docks, when you can leave the bikes. And in fact, it's a very affordable service. Well, I know because we spoke with Thibaut, it's not maybe that performant that we should want it to be, but it's still used like, it's used by 90% almost every day to commute, because it's like you can find it every 300 meters, and it's mostly used during peak hours. And it's really like in order to provide an active mobility and in order to give some place to the bikes. It's so like in very high seasons, there were like 10 trips per bike per day, which is, in fact, when you manage public space, this is what we would like, because a personal bike would just do 2 trips, maybe 3, and all shared mobilities, what we are looking for is that they optimize their number of trips.
That's a good point. And I mean, from an operator perspective, I know that 10 trips per vehicle per day is pretty much. And I assume e-scooters, I mean, I don't know if you can say the exact utilization of that in high season, but is it like between 4 and 8 or something? 4 and 7?
It depends on which operator, but there are information that you can find in many reports.
Okay. It's good. It's a good way. I like that answer. It's very protecting the operator's sensitive data. Good. And I just want to touch on Bergen just briefly, because I think it's really interesting kind of to see the competitive dynamics between the cities, because why I thought it was really important to have Bergen here is because they represent what the operators call Tier 2 city. And although some cities may be hurt by being called Tier 2 and not Tier 1, it's not personal, it's just about density. Can you share a bit about what happened in Bergen? Because you've had a pilot scheme, and then you had some legal issues, and then we're here today, and you have a tender or a permit scheme. It's in Norway, but let's just call it tender for this panel. It's just easier.
Going through the whole debate on legal, that could sit there for a long time. But yeah, the e-scooters came like in many other cities. It was chaos. We just had to react to that. It went to the legal system. The legal system decided we couldn't react as we wanted to just impound them. So we just had to manage the way it was. So based on the learnings we had from that and the pilot project, which some operators were cooperating, sharing data, and listening to our policies, based on that experience and knowledge, we could write the regulation, local regulation, after the national law was passed first, because we had to wait for that. So now we have a permit scheme tender with 3 operators, and maybe it's better that we're Tier 2, because then maybe fewer applications for us to read.
Yeah.
And we're evaluating.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. So in a smaller city, you can't have how many you want. And we have also chosen not to cap the city as a whole. We have sort of a mixed system, so that in a city where there are most people and actually most rides as well, you have to park in certain areas, and there is a cap there. But outside the area, it's free floating, because I'm of the strong opinion that you don't need to cap something as a whole if it's not a problem as a whole. The problems are always in the smaller areas. In this room, I don't know how many seats, there are 120 or something. If every 120 wanted to sit on the first 2 rows, you wouldn't cap the entire room for 30 there. So it's better to guide, and you have like a person at the end saying, you 12, you can go and sit here, you can go and sit on the second row, and kind of nudge people that way. But if it's not an issue, don't need to cap it.
No need to cap if there is no parking issue. I love that. As a former operator, it really warms my heart. But yeah, I mean, here we have a bit diverse regulation, and what I find really interesting about Bergen is that like the competition authority, or like the public body trying to protect competition, they kind of like went in and said, there should be at least 3 operators here. And now you had this really strange thing happening where basically one of the 3 operators just said, we can't really make a problem. Or what did they say? I'm not going to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, well, they said some words which I can't really say, but it's easy for everyone to understand. It wasn't financially viable for them to be there with 3 operators. And yeah, the market develops. When we had the regulations out, everyone could have their say. not a single operator said we want to. It was 3, 4, and none.
Yeah.
No, everybody open markets.
Yeah.
But now they've learned. They see, there's been a big shift since I was here last year. Now it's all about profit, and I think they've learned that.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think I can, with danger of saying something, speaking for other people is, I mean, I don't think necessarily the operators knew that much about maybe tier 2 cities as yourself at that time, being one of those operators myself a while back. But just tell us a bit about, because you had you had a scoring in the tender. You had the first, second, and third place, and then one of those slots were available. And then you asked the next operator.
yeah.
And then the next operator?
Yeah, so we went
And
down
then-
the list
Yeah.
until somebody...
How many operators said no?
3.
3, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not too bad.
No. Because, well, the permit only lasts till April 1st next year. And we asked them in
Right.
April this year.
Yeah, that's a
So
good point.
it wasn't enough time for them to come to Bergen, set up the whole operations and make profitable. So we got the impression, no, we'll just apply for the next permit because we have 2-year permits. Yeah.
So, but do you think like customer acquisition cost also is like a factor in terms of like needing to actually get the Bergen people to download the new app in some kind of way, shape, or form?
I mean, I can only speculate, but I highly assume that, yeah.
But let's segue over to London again, because I think what's really interesting about Bergen and London is that in Bergen you have operators pulling out and saying, no, we don't want to launch there. And then at least all the rumors I hear is that operators say that London is not profitable, and they're there. Why?
Some of them are in the room, so it's a bit awkward. I think shared micromobility can definitely work in London. Like, we've proven that with the bike share scheme that we have, kind of London's equivalent to the Velib that Natalia was talking about. Very successful, millions of trips every year. It can work, but that was launched in 2010. So I think there's also, I guess, just a bit of being aware of that things take time. And I'll try and give a bit of an example of that. But one of, I guess, in a way, because of the way that the rental trials have come about, we have maybe a little bit of an opportunity to learn more about the financial sustainability of the market. We did put the tender out in 2020. We launched the trial in June 2021. So we've literally just been going 2 years yesterday. There's still quite a lot that we need to learn about. And part of that is the partnership with the operators to understand more about the P&L, to understand more about how the decisions and the regulations and the standards that are put in place impact upon that P&L, and really kind of have those transparent conversations. But just on the timing piece, I know we'll kind of come back to it, but the topic of parking, governance in London is really complicated. We've got 33 London boroughs who are individual highways authorities, as well as then Transport for London, who look after the major road networks. And something like 99% of the parking that we've got for the trial, and we're using mandatory parking, is on borough land, which means there's a approvals process, there's a traffic order, there's a consultation. So kind of absolute best case scenario, you're looking at maybe 12 weeks to get one parking bay in. So I think the aspirations are there and the ability to get there is there, but it is unfortunately going to take time and a lot of commitment. Definitely under no illusion that we can't always just kind of sit here and say well, it's London, that definitely isn't going to last forever, and that there is, the shift in the market for sure. And that is going to start to have an impact at some point. But the operators also need, I guess, the certainty from national government about what is going to happen in the UK and when that legislation is going to come in.
I mean, you all represent different countries, different kinds of cities, different kind of governance, but I just really want to kind of explain one thing is that I'm not sure if the audience is aware of. I mean, TfL is a PTA, right? And here you have kind of two landowners. So here you have kind of a challenge in seeing like, okay, and I think London is a really good example of that. Like, okay, how should kind of the landowner connect to the mobility topic owner in terms of local governance? And one of the key questions to that is like shared micromobility in any way, shape, or form? Is that city furniture that can be subsidized by the city directly or through advertising or whatever? Or is it like a mobility form? So I'll let the word be a bit open to maybe this becomes a debate, I hope. Let's see if we can get some tensions rising.
Actually, in Stockholm, the team that is managing shared mobility is the team that is managing the food stores and the advertising. So originally, basically, so that they take it as in Zurich is a road safety team, for instance. So this is what I was saying. Basically, you didn't have a team about shared mobility, so they had to find people from different teams to actually made it up. And so it also provides an understanding about how it could be treated. Yeah, so here it's treated as a street furniture, and to the same extent, it has public space rights, and in some certain in some some people's head, it could also be seen as an asset that they need to monetize. They need to get revenue from. So and in other team. And also, this is the struggle that we have. I mean, if we only look at France, for instance, like we sometimes work with the metropolitan area, which is a PTA, and sometimes we work with the city, which is basically the landowner. And some of the challenge that we could have is that so they should work together because the public space allocation basically dictates your modal split very much, and so. Sometimes reconciling the two together is difficult.
And let's just stay with you a bit, Thibaut, because you kind of like act with both, you converse with both kinds of parties. Like, how is the different perspective in kind of meeting a PTA versus meeting someone who's kind of like a landowner or like a city administrator?
Well, sometimes, for instance, like so if you look at Bordeaux Métropole, if I take an example, for instance, in France, they actually
Where is that, by the way?
Bordeaux Métropole is Bordeaux is on the southwest of France. So
okay. And it's a region?
It's
like a public.
It's a city.
Okay,
but Bordeaux Métropole, you could think about it as a PTA. Yeah,
okay.
It's a PTA. Yeah. But they've been given basically authority to manage the e-scooter parking by the city.
Yeah.
So there you have a transfer authority over the way the public space is managed, right? So, so you do have that happen, and in this case it works very well because they can actually manage both, and I guess that's the case also with Ruta to some extent, as a PTA basically that actually have the authority. Or given the mandate basically by smaller communes to actually manage the public space. Yeah. So that's what I see like working very well. But yeah, the city would have a much of a higher focus around parking management, parking regulation, and obviously from a PTA perspective, it's more about like multimodal. Planning, mobility hub planning, understanding usage patterns, looking at like modal split, modal shift, etc.
Yeah, and I think everyone agrees that both of those things are important and need to be aligned. But I think the question is kind of where which should kind of be prioritized. Who has the final say?
I think maybe the people who own the area and the cities. Well, I'm working for the city, so I would say that.
Yeah, of course.
We have more like control of what happens other places than mobility hubs on the bus stations, stuff like that, which isn't always where people want to use an e-scooter either. They want to get somewhere where there isn't a bus. And we might know that area better, so it's easier for us to regulate that. But yeah, there is no silver bullet to this. It is difficult. We have to approach it from mobility aspect, parking aspect, safety aspect, all together, and it's slow moving. Like all the roads that lead to Rome weren't built in a day.
Of course, yeah.
That's
yeah.
a metaphor, by the way, when you mix idioms like that. My favorite is maybe we'll burn that bridge when we get to it, which maybe some in the audience would say Paris is done. But yeah, a lot of people don't know how we work and what we improve.
Yeah.
We had a journalist ask us, it's like,
Just conscious of time, since we're nearing the end, I just want to ask Helen quickly, who you have this issue live and up and running. You have 11 boroughs or 10?
10 currently in the trial, yeah.
And you'd like the other 22, wouldn't you?
Yeah, for sure. I think it would definitely highlight different use cases and test different things if we were able to expand the geography. So we currently cover about 100 kilometers squared. But I think ultimately everything needs to be done kind of in partnership. So for London, we have an elected mayor who sets a mayor's transport strategy. TfL is then responsible for kind of delivering against that and achieving the targets that are set out. And at the moment, in a way, the setup for every mode is slightly different. So we could go and put bus stops in different places to complete the transport network. But because of where things are at the moment, with kind of everything being fairly temporary on a trial basis, we're not able to go and do that and to make those decisions. So everything has to be kind of influence and relationships and partnering on it together.
Understood. Good. I would have wished that we had time for audience questions, but we had such a competent, talkative group here that we just simply got carried away. So, but let's give them all a round of applause, shall we?